and I am really excited for today. And I know that you guys will be too. Let's see, are we connected yet? Okay, so hello, beautiful people, and welcome to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jennifer Diamond, and I'm a certified plant-based nutrition coach, living a whole food, plant-exclusive lifestyle for health and well-being. And it literally gave me my life back. And I truly believe it can help you with yours too. And I am very excited to introduce a special guest today who I am so grateful to have on the show. Because today we will be discussing an in-depth, raw and real conversation about what happens when you're doing your best, right? Living your whole food, plant-based, gluten-free lifestyle, and then life still shows up. So what does that mean? Like work stress, overcommitments, exhaustions, relationships, financial pressures, health scares, grief, you know, from a loss of a loved one, or even a loss of a job. And I also want to include good things like welcoming a new baby into the family, right? So we want to discuss how food often becomes the place we land, right? Sometimes for comfort and sometimes for control, sometimes for escape, and the psychological reason behind that, and what we can do to help understand things and bring ourselves to a place of peace and joy. So I'd like to welcome today's guest speaker, the incredible Angela Crawford. Angela is a psychologist, vegan educator, food for life instructor, and the award-winning author of The Vegan Transformation. She brings such a compassionate, grounded understanding of how change actually happens and how to make it sustainable without shame or burnout. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here.
I am so glad that you're here. Angela and I have never actually met in person, but I learned about you through a membership platform that we both volunteer on called Plant-Based Support Group. And before we get started, and in case no one's familiar with you, can you take a moment to share a little bit about you or your background and how and why you landed here in the space of psychology and food?
Oh, yeah, I'm happy to share that. So my background is as a psychologist for many years now. For 25 years, I was a psychotherapist, working both with individuals and groups with a variety of issues, ranging from chronic pain and health issues and chronic medical conditions, and helping with, lifestyle change, and also trauma, anxiety, stress, all the stuff that people deal with in life. And so for many years, I just worked intensely, both one-on-one and in small groups with people, to help them cope with the stressors and griefs of life. And then I became first vegetarian and then vegan. Vegetarian many years ago when I learned about the whole thing of our food system, and just the things I learned just got me thinking, and it just led me down this whole journey, first learning some of the ethical aspects of what we ate, and that was a turning point for me. And then, it didn't take long for me to discover the health aspects as well, because I have a strong family history of heart disease, and I had never heard of Dean Ornish's work or Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn's work, and here I was, my background for like my internship and postdoctoral fellowship were in health psychology and pain management and things like that. And I had not known this food connection with our health and our mental health. And so, I continued on my journey, and I've continued to, I'd say, clean up my diet more and more over the years as I'm aging, just wanting to take better care of my own health. That's become much, much more of a motivator. And having lost both of my parents to lifestyle related issues, and, my father, heart disease, at a younger age than I would have liked, so it's just become an area of passion for me. I've, in the last few years, transitioned my work from being that full-time psychotherapist to doing more teaching, writing, coaching, educating about plant-based living, about the food-mood connection, about the psychological and social aspects of thriving on a plant-based journey. And as you mentioned, recently researched and wrote the book called The Vegan Transformation. So it's just become my passion because I think so many people don't know about this information, and we could feel so much better and be so much healthier personally and as a society if we all could learn about the power of plants for our health and emotional health as well. So,
wow, that's incredible. And I'm sorry to hear about, your parents. That's always hard. And, it's hard also when, and I don't know if you knew ahead of time, but like when you kind of know, oh, if they would just, try this or that, maybe it could have changed. But maybe it was, inspiration for you. I'm not sure, but I'm glad that you went down the road that you did. And yeah, it's important to share and get the word out. And the fact that we don't know is crazy. So thank you for sharing that. So I just want to take a moment to say hello to those of you in the chat. And if you're watching this live, go ahead, say hello in the chat if you haven't, and tell us where you're tuning in from today. And, if you're watching this as a replay, of course, you can still leave comments or questions in the comment section, and I will do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. So I just want to say hello to Mona. Mona says, hello, Jennifer and Todd. Made my cake for my birthday tomorrow. Pizza homemade for my dinner. Well, Mona, happy early birthday. That's awesome. She says the big 70. Not one female has made it out of the 70s. So after tomorrow, of course, getting right back on track. You know what? Whatever works for you, I know you're going to do great and enjoy your birthday. And let's see. Hello from Missouri, Jennifer says. Help me with that. Clarenda. I always mess up your name, but I'm so glad you're here. Clarenda Davis is tuning in from Missouri. And the rest of you, anybody, feel free to ask questions for this chat. Angela is happy to answer questions. Just if you could put some question marks before and after, it will help us just to make sure that we don't miss it. So again, Angela, thank you so much for being here today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So anyways, I just want to ask if there's anything you want to start off with, or, if you want me to just kind of share my thoughts about things, and we can go from there.
Yeah, I'm open to both. I was just thinking one thing that is so important, and this relates to the support groups you and I both lead in the plant-based support community, is that psychological and social factors are often overlooked on people's plant-based journeys. I think, we think if we have the right nutrition or, the right plant-based doctor or the right information, that's enough sometimes to make the change. And what the research shows is often when people get tripped up is it's often psychological, emotional, and or social factors that get us off, off the path. And so it's so important to talk about. So I'm so glad I'm here, and I'm open to kind of seeing where the conversation leads.
Yeah. So I definitely want to connect with you about real emotional challenges in life, like stress, grief, sadness, loss, and even joy, as I mentioned earlier, or, issues with weight loss or health concerns, and why food plays such an important role in these in all the emotions for people. So, let's start with that question, right? From a psychological perspective, why do we give so much emotional weight to food?
Yeah, that's a big one. And I think there's probably a lot of layers to that, but at least, so one layer would be how food is so emotionally tied, to memories in our past, memories of comfort, memories of happiness, memories of sadness. If I think any of us that are here today listening to this now or later, we can probably reflect back to a memory in childhood where maybe we had a holiday meal that had certain meaning for us, or where grandma made this certain food that we loved, or, we looked forward to certain foods for certain situations. And so there's certainly those emotional ties that just stick with us over time. And then on top of it, there is, current events that also tie us to food, certain cultural expectations or family expectations. So there's that. And I think beyond that, there's more physiological aspects of how food affects us, things like a lot of us have heard about the dopamine effect of certain foods and this idea that a lot of foods are created to make us want more, to be really high in salt, fat, sugar, or some combination of those, so that, maybe in the olden days when that wasn't quite as available, we wouldn't be quite as addicted. But, some of it just, it's beyond what our, human beings have been used to. And so we get these foods and they become a habit, sometimes an addiction. And I know I can relate to that. For much of my younger years, I definitely was into comfort foods and definitely a chocoholic. And, I still do love chocolate, but my relationship with it has changed since my years of the plant-based journey. But definitely all of those reasons and, can be part of why food has such a call for us, or such a pull.
Yeah, yeah. That is a really good point to bring up. There, you touched on a lot of things already. And it also, like when you think of dopamine and all of that, I also want to talk about willpower.
Mm.
I hear people all the time talk about willpower. Some people say, like, if you don't have willpower, then, you're not going to be successful. And, what do you think? Is that true?
Hmm. Yeah, I don't think that that's how I think about it. Certainly willpower has its place, but it can ebb and flow just like motivation. So to rely on that as our way of getting things done, for most people, we're gonna have times where our willpower is way down and it's just not gonna be the thing to carry us through. So I think often, having those systems in place, those habits, those ways we set up our home and our life so that we're not relying on willpower. It's more, we've got the systems in place, we've got the habits in place, and that takes time to develop. But really, there's a lot of other factors that help us more than just willpower alone, I believe.
Yeah. So I had a really tough 2025. I had my father died, and just a
I'm
plethora
sorry.
of, yeah, thank you. Just a lot of things kept like dominoing.
Mhm.
And it doesn't even have to be my story, but people go through a lot of emotional uh, trauma, and sometimes it's like too much, and it can be overwhelming. And so even when we know, like I know, or we know, a lot of people know, if they're already have been on this journey for a while, the what to do's, how to do it, how to set things up, how to be successful. But for me, there were times, and I have heard this through some of my patients as well, or my clients, that I don't care. I know those things, but the emotional stress is so high that I just am going to go to something that I maybe am not consciously aware of, but I remember it as being comforting and something that I don't want now because of all the things that we know. So if a person finds themselves in that place, I mean, is there even anything to say or to do? Like, do you just walk through it and then take a step back? Or, how do you do that when you already know, but the emotion or the stress is so great that it makes it that much more difficult?
Yeah. First of all, just a lot of compassion when that's going on. I think sometimes we forget to be compassionate to ourselves.
Mm.
And again, I think a lot of these things, there's not one easy answer for everybody. As you shared that, I was thinking about the year that my father passed away, which for me was now several years ago. But I could see myself being pulled into unhealthy eating, but one thing I think that really helped me was I also that particular year found comfort from getting involved in yoga. So sometimes like it can be about what else brings us comfort that we can draw on. It's not about, oh, I have to be perfect, and if I make a mistake, then you know, I'm done with this. We may slip back sometimes. One of the stages in the change journey is setbacks or relapses. We may not want to have them. We're not trying to have them, but if they have happened, the best thing we can do is have compassion for ourselves, figure out what's not working, and try to come up with some new solutions. And it might mean other ways to find comfort. Sometimes maybe we're ready to let go of that old way of comforting ourselves and maybe finding something that actually does meet the emotional needs that we have, whether that's emotional support from other people, whether that's practices like yoga or meditation, whether it's being part of a spiritual community, being part of a group where people work on grief or eating issues. There's a lot of ways that we can cope, but just compassion, I think, is first, because being hard on ourselves and not seeing that there's a need that's needing to be met,
Yeah, I like
that.
that compassion. Um, you know, I also think that there's something to be said about our memory, right? So we may remember this certain piece of X food that
Mm,
was, oh, it was this and it was that, and it was on the pedestal, and oh my gosh, it was amazing, and now I don't have it. And, oh, it was at the neighbor's barbecue, and there it is, and I'm feeling blah, blah, blah. And the story goes on. And I have heard from people that just have it anyways, and they
mm,
were like, I mean, not everybody, but I've heard like, it wasn't what I thought it was going to
mm.
be. It's not what I remembered.
Yeah.
So, can you talk about that? And why is it that our memory may, you tell me, like, I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so interesting. And again, I think there's the two components. There's the more psychological, emotional connection that's there, and then there is that taste addiction thing that was probably more prevalent at that stage in our life too. I mean, one thing as far as the taste and the addiction piece, when we started eating cleaner and more whole food plant-based, as you mentioned, sometimes those foods just don't taste the same anymore. They don't have the same enjoyment anymore because we're no longer hijacked, in that way by the high salt, fat, sugar kind of thing where we need more and more to get, that good feeling. So I think, the cleaner we're eating, it changes our taste buds. So those foods don't taste as good, but also we're growing. And sometimes what emotionally met a need when we're younger, we kind of see like, maybe that isn't what I need anymore. There can be different parts of us that get triggered and they have different needs. And sometimes those needs now we can maybe learn new ways to meet them. It might be a learning opportunity. Like, what really fits where I'm at now in my life that is actually better for me. But yeah, I've heard of people, like you said, trying the food and it didn't taste the same. So I guess, that's an example of where maybe a quote unquote setback could be a learning opportunity that maybe I don't really need to go there anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've also heard and seen that for some people, that one bite is a derail.
Mm,
And so some people know that because they know their personalities or they know, and other people don't. And then how do you get back? If
mm,
you know the thing, see, that's what's so hard. That's what I really wanted to get into with you is, we know, or hopefully if you don't know, you research and then about all of the things written out, the story and the reasons and everything. But then emotions and that component of things can be so hijacking. I mean, you used the word hijack also when you were talking about, you know, not being what we remember, right? So the salt, sugar, oil, flour, whatever it is. And so in case people aren't familiar with that, like, can you give a little quick, how do you know if you're being hijacked by your food or not.
Mm. Yeah, I think what you're speaking to is kind of cravings versus true hunger, perhaps in a way, those cravings for those foods that really make us feel good, you know, but we're not actually having physical signs of hunger and, that are for something that really would nourish us physically. Those foods that just, I have to have that specific food versus an apple, like if we're hungry, an apple can satisfy, but if we're just going for a craving, it's probably going to be for a very specific food with, probably again, I say the salt, fat, sugar, flour, those are often the things that are most addictive for people. So I guess recognizing your triggers and yes, knowing yourself, as you mentioned, some of us can maybe have a setback and pick back up pretty easily. And for other people, that one time eating something that isn't on your plan can really derail you. And so, yes, no, knowing who you are when it comes to that. And we're not wanting anyone to have a setback. I mean, obviously we want to like just be a steady uphill thing, but from my work of working with people over the years with all kinds of issues, I just know that setbacks and even sometimes relapses do happen, and how we handle them is more important than the fact that it happened in some ways. It's more this idea that I don't have to give up. I don't have to start over. I can just recommit and take that next step. And
I,
that's a huge thing.
I love that. You don't have to sit in it and stay there.
Hmm.
You can learn from it, and just like a fall, you get up, you wipe your knees off, your hands, and you move forward. And that's something I think a lot of people need to remember, because I know for me, anyways, the I could be really hard on myself, and a lot of people can be very hard on themselves. So just remembering, um, that we can start over. Or sometimes I even like to talk to myself as if I'm talking to myself as a little child, because I will be nicer to the
Hmm.
child, right? And explain, and it's okay, and start over, and encourage and cheer. Whereas if I'm just talking to myself in not reflecting at, I might, not be so kind, not be so considerate. And I think that's might be a grooming thing for where we live. I could be wrong, but I also want to say, uh, you mentioned the difference between physical hunger and emotional hunger. So, how can people begin to separate physical hunger from emotional hunger needs without feeling like they're depriving themselves or they're missing out on something? Maybe there's a disconnect from joy, even though that's not a reality. Maybe that's what they're thinking. Like, how do people go about doing that?
Yeah, well, I will answer that. And I do want to mention, as far as what you were saying about talking to your younger self, that may be good to touch on a little more in a moment, because I think kind of an approach called internal family systems, which is kind of a parts work approach, can be super helpful for like navigating some of these emotional aspects of our, change journey, our healing journey, all of that. But yeah, in terms of physical hunger versus, am I just having a craving for something I don't need? I think we start to find our own signs, when we're really, really hungry, sometimes there'll be a physical sign like my stomach growling, or, it's been a certain amount of time in between meals and I'm feeling maybe a little fatigued or whatever. You start to find your own signs. And I think that's going to be different to some degree for different people in terms of their body chemistry. But when it's those certain foods that aren't really on your plan as far as health, that's probably more a craving. And so maybe there's a need that you're feeling that needs to be met more emotionally. It
Mm.
could be to take a walk. It could be to get some fresh air. It could be to call a friend. It could be to journal and write out some feelings. You might check in, if you're having one of those moments where I don't think it's really mealtime and I'm wanting something that's really not on my plan anyway, what am I really feeling in this moment and what am I needing? And just seeing if you can tune into the emotions and the actual real needs that come with those emotions.
Yeah. Yeah. I like how you said, you talked about, am I really hungry?
Yeah.
Right? Because sometimes like we get into this thing where we have this idea. Uh, Sometimes it's a reaction to eat something we don't want, but sometimes we have an idea ahead of time. And that can come into play through emotion. And, then the next thing you know, you didn't really even give yourself a chance to think, am I hungry? Maybe I will eat the meal first and see if I still want it after I'm not hungry. And most times you don't,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's like a whole self-awareness
Yeah.
component that I think is really important. And that's something to practice, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, definitely. You're kind of speaking to mindfulness. I think one part of the plant-based journey is that often, if we're eating a whole food, plant-based, low-fat diet, we can eat a lot more than possibly we did before because it doesn't have the calories or often the oil or other things that would really make us be unhealthy from, eating more of it. And I think it's easier to see where that apostat kicks in and says, okay, enough. Um, I think you've eaten enough or whatever. It just, fiber and all of that fills us up more slowly. And we just start to see like, okay, I've had enough. And then, like you say, that unhealthy snack may not have as much appeal when we've really filled up with our healthy foods. Have an apple first and then see how you're feeling, whatever, have your meal first, the healthy meal.
Have 4 apples.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
Like there's nothing wrong with having lots of fruit and veggies. In fact, for mental health, the more the better. They find like 7 to 11 servings are optimal for better emotional and mental well-being. So, as well as the physical health. But as far as, I think mindfulness is sort of what you're speaking to, and this idea that can we learn to just check in more with ourselves, like be present without judging, notice the thoughts, notice the feelings, notice the body sensations, just be curious, not always have to act or react, just try to
Right.
notice more.
Yeah. I'll tell you, me, some of the harder times are when I'm tired. It's the end of the
Mm.
day. I've had a long day. I am just, maybe overstimulated. So I'll bring into the fact that households, right, play into a part because, in our household, we're a mixed household. Not everybody eats the same way. And I think that when my game is down, and the emotions can happen there, so maybe I didn't plan very well, or I planned something but it didn't get executed and the time is gone and I'm hungry and I'm tired and I'm this and I'm that. And then somebody in my family says, they're the same way and they're going to go to a drive-through and get something. Well, so then I could feel resentment, not because I want to go eat that food, but because I want to go through a drive-through, right? Or go somewhere and have somebody gently and kindly hand me my own food. And I know that's where, batch cooking comes in, and putting it in the freezer and having it, right? But sometimes that emotional component, it's like, why can't I do that? I try so hard, I this, I that, and for this other person, and this isn't a true example, but this is a very close to heart example. Those people in my household, right, they don't have the same issues. They have other issues maybe, but or they have different goals, or things are more acceptable, right, whatever. But it's like, what do you do in that? Is there anything else you can do in that moment, besides being resentful and like, I want to go there too. Not
Mhm.
really, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, again, there are different layers to what you're sharing. And, one layer is just our ongoing self-care so that when these kind of crisis moments happen, we may not be as overwhelmed by them or caught off guard by them, So how we're living our life when you're not in that moment of tired and
Right.
exhausted plays a role in how you're going to handle that tired, exhausted moment. So if you're having good routines overall, that's a foundation first, where you're eating enough, you're structuring your day as best you can to make sure you get your food and your meals and your self-care and you know your you time. And in life, of course, doesn't always mean that we're going to be perfect at that, but that's a goal to start with, because I think it's really hard to put a band-aid on a tough moment if you're not kind of trying to live your best life the rest of the day, setting structures in place, setting up a lifestyle that takes care of you and has holistic balance. It's kind of like for people that meditate, or don't meditate, they'll say, like, I tried the breathing technique right when I was really stressed, but they never do it any other time. It just doesn't have the same effect. So for this moment, then, when you're feeling this, all the other self-care can help a little bit to step back and maybe take a deep breath, have compassion for the part of you that's throwing a little tantrum right now, that, maybe again, a younger part. And I think that's a great time to bring your wise adult self on board and see what she'd have to say, like to a client, a friend, a loved one who was feeling that way, and say
Yes.
that to yourself, to that younger you, because it probably is a younger you, that's having that sort of emotional reaction of feeling left out or feeling like, why can't someone just take care of me in that way?
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I want to get into parts work in a minute. I do want to just take a second and just say hello to a few people here. We have Marilyn Dubin. She's in the house. Jim Dixon, 6688. Good afternoon, everyone. We have Core Scorpy. Hi, Jennifer, Todd, Angela, and friends. And I just want to go back for a minute to Clarinda Davis, who I messed up your name, but I do remember hanging out with you in person before, and I hope you're doing well. And thank you for being here, everybody. If you guys have any questions, please, or comments, you don't have to have a question. You can share a comment, share a story, share anything with us and be part of the conversation. That's what's so great about going live. So parts work. Can you share, for somebody that doesn't know what that is, just a little definition about that?
Yeah, definitely. There's different variations of parts work, but one that's become well known in recent years is internal family systems, which was created by Dr. Richard Schwartz, and he developed it working with people with eating disorders. And he found that it was like transformative when he started to relate to the different parts of a person rather than just acting like every feeling we have, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but maybe a way to say this is, you felt times where you felt a part of you wanted one thing and a part of you wanted another. Most of us have felt that way at some point in our life, where there's an inner conflict. Part of me wants to eat healthy and another part of me wants to go eat that chocolate, Milky Way bar or whatever. And a part of me wants to exercise. A part of me wants to lay on the couch. A part of me wants to cry. A part of me is like, why are you feeling that way? So we all have different parts of us. It's not that we're multiple personality disorder. It's just there's different ego states that we have in us, and some of them are more manager states that help us get things done. And then some parts are what they call sort of exiles, which are kind of our more wounded parts that carry different emotions. And then there's other parts that might be a little bit less constructive in their approach, but are there like when we're really overwhelmed to kind of try to solve the problem, sometimes in not so healthy ways. But the idea of it is just in recognizing we have different parts and kind of being compassionate towards them, being curious, like, why is this part of me feeling this way? And just wanting to know. It often just helps lessen the intensity, because we all have a wise adult self too, that when we can bring that on board, it sort of helps us make decisions from this more centered part of us rather than letting a younger part or a kind of wounded part run the show. Now, you can work on this in things like therapy, but there are also books about it. For example, he wrote a good book called No Bad Parts. And there's probably things online you can find. But I think it's a helpful way to understand, like, when we're feeling feelings that maybe don't make sense to us, but we want to make a better decision. Pushing the part away rarely works, but compassion, like, oh, I'm so sorry you're feeling this way, tell me more what you're feeling and needing. And then a lot of times just the acknowledgement is enough. It doesn't always have to be acted on. So I don't know, when you talk to your younger self, did you find that at all, Jennifer, that kind of helped?
Well, I don't know that I looked at it as parts work, but I think that I could have. Sometimes I think, and I don't have a lot of experience with it, but I am aware of what that is, and I have seen some real live examples where people were, kind of testing out to share and show what that is. And so it's like going into that part of you, maybe the part that's not agreeable or that's having the temper tantrum or whatever, and kind of sitting in there and kind of figuring out the why and what's going on, and let's work through this thing. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would be a good description. And, as you were sharing, I was thinking, I think there's different levels of how involved you can get with it. I think at the simplest level, sometimes having that conversation with ourselves as if there was a younger part of us, that itself could be something any of us could do without any additional help. And that often does bring some comfort, because there are younger parts of us that still have feelings sometimes, that get activated maybe by triggers, by stress, by grief, by things that just push our buttons. So it doesn't always have to be a deep, intense thing that's done in therapy. It can be just sometimes being kind and speaking as if we were speaking to our child self. And there's just something very comforting in that, just as what you described doing. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing about that. I also wrote down here, when you were talking about ongoing self-care, so that when you have the moments of, why me, or I'm tired, or all of those things, I think there's something to be said for ongoing self-care. And that could just mean slowing down, right? And not being go, go, go. I am guilty of that. I am a go, go, goer. As long as I feel good, I want to, be productive and share and help and enlighten. And inspire, but to what cost, right? You could still do all those things, but you can also do them in a mindful self-care way. Like, for example, I find it very important to do things like, I love a bathtub. I love soaking in a tub, and whether it's putting some soft candles on, or having a little bit of meditative music or soft music or whatever, that's something that brings me joy. So I want to make sure, for me, that I incorporate that whenever I can. And it doesn't, it doesn't always fit, like at the end of the day or first thing in the morning, right? Because first thing in the morning, most people are like in the shower, out, gotta go, but breathing is another one. If I consciously take a step back, and sometimes consciously I think about it, but if I actually physically take the step back, it helps it become more real for me, because I'm like, okay, I can take a few breaths, bring it down, and now come back up here and go ahead and review whatever I was dealing with in that moment. And I believe, like you were saying with the practicing, you were saying, if somebody's doing breath work only in the moment that they need it, and they're not practiced, it's going to be that much harder. And if I can share, my husband at one point was trying to do meditation with me, and he kept saying, or he would fall asleep, or he would say, I'm just thinking about all the things that I have to do. So if that's where you are and you're not practiced in a moment of crisis or high level stress, how's that going to help?
Yeah, I mean, you've hit on something really important. It's, these practicing structures, routines, lifestyle medicine has more than one pillar, and, plant strong nutrition is one of the pillars, but the others include things like stress management skills and, adequate sleep and social support. So I think thinking about what are the pillars in my life that I need to have in place to help me live a balanced lifestyle and be more able to stick to, yes, the healthy eating and the other things I need for my well-being. I mean, for me, how I start the day and how I end the day might be two of the most important times in the day, because that's maybe the times in the day we have the most control, in some ways, where we can get up a little earlier if needed to kind of allow some time to ground ourselves before we're off and running. I know for me that was important, especially working as a therapist. I needed that kind of grounded time before I was off seeing clients. Even if it's not a long time in the morning, just a little time to either do some breathing or journaling or exercise or prayer or some combination of those. And then in the evening, as you were mentioning, maybe some winding down routine or, like you mentioned, the hot bath, something that you love that helps you decompress from the day. And then maybe little reminders throughout the day that kind of help you remember, like you mentioned, to step back and breathe or to take a break. Setting timers can help. All these different things we can do to kind of help our lives have a little more harmonious routine, and then maybe reset if we get off track.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are all great suggestions and things to think about. I'll just share really quick. I'm not picking on my husband, but I just, we live together. So I have a lot of examples. But, when he worked and drove to an office, he used to go really early when he didn't need to. And he used to say, that was his downtime and he didn't want the traffic. Then when we all went to working from home, he used to leave for the office with keys and get in the car and drive around the area and come back to start his day. And I used to tease him and I used to say, are you going to go drive in a circle now? Or are you going to drive in a circle? But for him, that was really, really what helped him get in the mindset. He said, I have to recreate driving to the office because that's all I know, and so you can be creative in wherever you are, whatever your needs are. And so, now he does different things, but, it's an evolution and it's okay to adapt and kind of change as we go.
Yeah, definitely. And that makes a lot of sense to me, what you just described. So
yeah, for a while there, I was like, I don't get it, but I finally understood it. And yeah, so that was really good. So I have a question here. For people who don't have obvious physical symptoms, as a reminder, like high blood pressure instead of pain, how do they stay emotionally connected to their why? In other words, like for me, I was dealing with small fiber neuropathy. And so I had physical sensations. And when I realized that the food was improving it, anytime I felt that, it was a reminder, stay on track, stay on track, stay on track, right? Whereas somebody else might have high blood pressure, you don't feel that necessarily. Yeah. And so, that might be, feeling it as terrible as that was, or can be firsthand. Sometimes I was like, this is a blessing in disguise because it's my personal reminder. So if someone doesn't have something like that, what would you say about them, like trying to stay on track?
Well, what you mentioned about having a strong why, that is super important because as we talked about before, our willpower, our motivation is going to go up and down and change at different moments. So having the systems in place, of course, your habits, but also having that why. So you can go deeper with what that why is. And I think it's good to write it out, maybe even have pictures that illustrate it. You might have to go below the surface. So obviously, if someone has digestive issues or pain or severe heart disease, it's a little easier to have that why and see that if I get off track at all, I get consequences. For some of the rest of us, it's not as easy as that. So as you think about your why, I'd go deeper. So if it is for health reasons, but maybe like you say, it's high blood pressure or something not as obvious, go deeper with like, okay, if I stay on this lifestyle, what does it do for me in terms of the things that matter to me, whether that be being there for my loved ones, whether it be being able to do certain activities, whether it be feeling better in certain ways that I can identify, because you might notice that, I still feel better when I eat cleaner, and when I eat foods that actually nourish my gut microbiome. And there's a real food mood connection, and fiber and plant strong foods, like with lots of antioxidants, help our emotional well-being. So there might be subtle signs you can find too, both physically and emotionally. And I will add too that for some of us, we start to expand our reasons to include all kinds of reasons. It could be spiritual reasons that, eating foods that are from the plant kingdom align with spiritual values, caring for the earth, being there for my kids and modeling healthy eating for them. There can be so many reasons. And I think the research suggests that if we have more than one reason, and if at least one or so of those reasons go beyond ourself, it gives that added thing that when that willpower isn't there, we just won't do it, because that strong why that might have more than one prong to it is there. And maybe we have it written out so we can review it from time to time, or a picture that represents it. I think that those kinds of things can help. I mean, just there's some reason you went on this path, and finding a way to keep reconnecting with it and maybe expanding it. This is the only way I know to eat that's not only healthy for your body, but is also more sustainable for the planet and less, invasive to all beings, and more aligned with many of our spiritual principles. So it has so many components, and you can find which ones resonate for you.
Yeah, definitely. I can think about, like, when I was a child, there weren't certain foods available, even in snack foods, that cause that huge dopamine hit. Now, we didn't have. I mean, the sizes were different, the ingredients were different, it was grown different, right? Even if it wasn't a good thing. But now it's like, how do you unlearn something when you've experienced it, right? So it's hard to go back to, like, what I'm trying to say is, once we learn something through experience and we have that memory, then it's sometimes hard. So we need to set ourselves up for success by being prepared, and understand how to navigate something. Like, and the reason I brought this up, when I was a child, I didn't know those flavors of my future, right? So I didn't have to worry about that. But now, we do. I don't know if I'm making sense. It's just more of a statement. So yeah, it's really, really interesting. I know that setbacks and relapses, they happen often for a lot of people. Why are they part of the change process, and why don't they mean someone's failed? Like, let's talk about that a little bit, setbacks and relapse, because I think that's really important. And we touched on it earlier, but just to go a little deeper.
Yeah. That's one of the things that I found so helpful talking with clients about over the years, was normalizing setbacks as part of the change process. I sometimes think about our journey of change using something called the trans-theoretical model of change, or sometimes called the stages of change by James Prochaska and Carlo Di Clemente, who are two psychologists that developed that many, many years ago, like in the 80s. And it's been well studied as a way of understanding that process of lifestyle change through all different kinds of ways of changing, but applying it to plant-based eating. We go through these different stages in the journey, going from pre-contemplation, where we're not even thinking about change, to contemplation, where we're, hey, maybe I might try this, to preparation, where, okay, I am going to do this and I'm getting ready to get started. And then action, we're living it, we're doing it. Probably where a lot of your viewers might be, or, others might be curious and in that contemplation or preparation stage. And then there's maintenance, which sometimes we forget about. I think a lot of us think when we take action, I'm there, I've got it, but really maintenance, which is kind of the longer term part of the change process, ideally, if you stay the course. Maintenance is where we're really developing the habits, the systems, the support, the practices, the routines that help this just to be part of our everyday life. So it becomes more normalized that I have my shopping routine, I have my cooking or food prep routine, I have my support system on board as much as possible to at least understand my lifestyle, if nothing else, even if they're not doing it with me. We might have our home set up in certain ways so that it makes it more doable. So maintenance is so important. And we also learn, how am I going to navigate those stressors, and how am I going to navigate travel? But even with maintenance, we're going to have times where we might fall off track. Maybe we run into a situation we hadn't prepared for, or we give into pressure, or we have that night that you described where you were feeling like tired, and so when those things happen, setbacks or relapse is considered part of the change process. It doesn't mean that everybody will have one. It doesn't mean you're trying to have one. It just means if it does happen, knowing that most people in making a change do have ups and downs. And if you do, the best thing you can do is learn from it. It's not a failure. And in fact, the best way to make it a failure is to think of it that way, because then it gives yourself permission to give up.
Yeah.
But if you instead see it as like, okay, this is part of change because I'm flexing new muscles, I'm learning new skills, I'm trying new things. Anytime someone stretches, you can't have a setback if you're not moving. It's only when you're moving forward that that's possible. And, when you do, just if you can bounce back as quickly as possible to see it as, what can I learn from this? Gosh, I'm sorry this happened. I'm kind of bummed this happened. I might even be mad at myself this happened, but okay, what happened here? What can I learn from it? How do I keep moving forward? And not tomorrow, but right now, and that it can make you stronger in your commitment, actually. I mean, not that you're looking again for this to happen, but if it does, if you view it as a learning opportunity, you can be stronger from it. And so I think, again, the compassion. I think one statistic that can help is most former smokers tried at least 8 times before they were successful in quitting. Plant-based eating might be different than that. I don't think there's any statistics, but just know you're eating differently than most people around you. And it's normal. There can be challenges. And we're all in this to learn and grow together. And also having support to others on this journey, like this community.
Yes, that's really great. I love that you were talking about maintenance. And so, you can't get, I don't think you could get really cocky, once you're at your maintenance, because of all the things that you just talked about. And I'm wondering, can someone ever truly let their guard down? Is that even an option?
Yeah, probably not. Again, I think there's different ways to think about this. So when it comes to addictions, if someone especially had food addictions that were really hardcore, I think you'd be much more cautious with ever thinking you'd reach this magical place that I've got it figured out. Technically, in the stages of change model, there is a stage they call termination, where someone has lived a lifestyle for many years and it just becomes so part of their routine that really it would be unlikely they'd go off track. Whether, and all of us reach that, I don't know. It might depend on what the habit is that we're talking about here. And it might depend on the person. It might depend on different factors. So we can reach a place where it's much more ingrained and less likely that we'd have a setback, especially if we're really committed and it really matters to our values and our health. But yeah, I do think like many of us, though, might need to have some degree of caution, like knowing that we're going to need to keep doing the lifestyle thing, the habits, the ways that this is a lifestyle for us, not just some passing diet.
Yeah. And slowing down and self-care, I think those things can really be an important part of figuring that out. Because when we're well rested, and that could be a metaphor, right? We can, and when we're kind to ourselves and we're not in the moment, I think then that allows us to be more successful and really remember why we're doing this. And you talked about your why. I did a show, it's a replay about finding your why. So if you're watching and you don't really know what your why is, your why is I call it the emotional connection, the reason. And so you could find it on my channel or anywhere, but to really understand and give yourself some time to figure that out, I think can be really helpful when trying to be successful in maintenance, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely. Just continuing to come back to that. And if you have an in-depth video about it, that's a great way to dive in deeper and, maybe do some journaling and reflecting. It needs to be a strong enough reason to override the fact that you're part of like maybe 1% of the population eating a certain way and that you're a forerunner for a healthier, kinder way of eating, kinder to your body, kinder to your health, and you're a forerunner, and it takes some determination and that commitment to as you're saying, a strong why, and
Yes.
knowing what that is.
Yeah. So if someone is listening
Mhm.
today, or a replay or whatever, if someone's watching this and they're feeling discouraged or behind or ashamed or any of those kinds of feelings, what's the most important thing that they can do for themselves right now?
Yeah. I think it comes back again to that self-compassion. So many of us are good at being compassionate to other people. And, we're maybe a good friend, a good partner, and we would have empathy for what someone else was struggling with, but we sometimes are very harsh on ourselves. And even if you don't think you are, take a moment to look at your self-talk sometime. If your words are harsh or judgmental or like, why are you feeling this? Why are you needing this? Why are you doing this? That's probably this critical voice, again, that many of us have. And just being aware of that. And I mean, this was a lesson like that I knew as a psychotherapist, but applied to myself in a more deep way, I'd say 7, 8 years ago, of just being much more mindful of that inner voice and talking to myself with a more compassionate tone. And it could be viewing myself as a younger person, or it could just be bringing that wiser, more compassionate part of me to talk to whatever I was feeling. And just being more compassionate. Gosh, I'm sorry you're feeling that, or what are you needing right now? And that changes things, because often our emotions are a response to different feelings and different needs. And we don't always have to act on them. Sometimes they are pointing to something to act on, but sometimes they're just something that need to be acknowledged. And so just that pausing, checking in, what are you feeling? What are you needing? Having a compassion. I'm sorry, gosh, it's hard. I'm here. There's something called the butterfly hug, where you can pat back and forth on your arms. That's something from one of the trainings in a approach called EMDR, but it's a bilateral stimulation that just kind of helps soothe. We call it the butterfly hug. So things like that, grounding techniques, breathing down into your feet, feeling your connection with the earth. All those things can just help, like, okay, let's come back to now, and what do I need right now? And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, right before you mentioned that, I was thinking, gosh, there have been times when I've given myself a hug and
Hmm.
I didn't do the pat, which everybody
Hmm.
try it.
Hmm.
Let's take a minute and be compassionate and share with ourselves. But I would even like, just
Hmm.
just
Yeah.
love myself, and be my best cheerleader and know that I'm doing my best. And if I had a setback with, health reasons or something, even though I'm trying my best, right? It's okay. And,
Yeah.
and acknowledge things, that's been very helpful. Mona Arendt says self-compassion is so hard. And
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah. I was just thinking as we were talking, a great teacher for like meditations for compassion is Tara Brach. She's a psychologist that has mindfulness meditations. There's a lot of great teachers that can help us connect with our self-compassion when maybe it's not easy for us.
yeah, thank you. These are all great tips people can check out. Um, I love the self-talk. The self-talk, oh my gosh. It is, I would never think that it was such an important thing to pay attention to, but it really does. The way we
Mhm.
think and the way we talk to ourselves has this huge effect on even our digestion. Isn't that so?
Yes. Yeah. Definitely a big gut brain connection. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Now, just wrapping this up, I wanted to just ask you if you could just share a little bit about your book and where people can find you if they want to reach out to you.
Yeah, sure. My book, The Vegan Transformation, A Journey to Heal Yourself and the World, I surveyed and interviewed vegans about how their life had changed emotionally, socially, and spiritually with a plant-based lifestyle. And the people I interviewed came to the vegan lifestyle for a range of reasons. Some had come for physical reasons and healed dramatically from physical conditions, and others came more for the ethical reasons. And so it looks at all of that, and it looks at like how did things change on an emotional, social, spiritual level, and some key, transformative pillars that came through my conversations and surveys with these people. And it shares some of their stories. So it has both inspiration and encouragement, and also has a chapter on like how do we handle the more emotional and social aspects of being plant-based or vegan in a non-plant-based, non-vegan world, and so it covers some of that as well. Because I felt like so many books tackled the physical health benefits of this lifestyle, but I hadn't heard as much about how do we change internally as
Mm,
we actually honor our values and really do what's not easy, to change our lifestyle and be, like I mentioned, a leader for plant-based living. So that's what the book is about. It's available anywhere you buy books, whether Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Bookshop, all of those places, in ebook, paperback, and then also audiobook. And people can find me through my website, AngelaCrawfordPh.com. And I'm just all about bringing together the psychology and emotional resilience with living an empowered plant-based lifestyle.
yeah, yeah, that's great. And if you send us those, your website and the book and different things, we can put it in the show notes afterwards if people want to check the show notes. So, do you have any last anything extra that you want to share or say? And then I do have a comment that I could read also that's in the chat.
Okay. Well, I've just been really glad to be here. It's been such a great conversation, and I just appreciate the work that you do, and I don't know, all the growth that all the people in your community are trying to do, because it's an important journey. I think it's going to be transformational for us on a personal level as we keep eating more plants and honoring, what brings health to our body. And we need support. So we need communities like this. So thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me.
I absolutely am so glad. And I'll just say, Marilyn Dubin said, I would say just step back and be thankful for all of the positives we have in our life. So I think that's a great way to end this wonderful conversation. I just want to say this has been so great, Angela. Thank you so much for sharing your incredible wisdom and your insight. And to everyone watching, thank you for being here, for showing up for yourself, and for staying curious instead of critical, right? I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. And like I always say, don't forget to eat your greens and give plants a chance, because they won't let you down, I promise. And we will see you next time. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.